So what is cancer, really? I mean, we hear that word all the time, but what's actually going on inside our bodies? Well, today, we're going to pull back the curtain and follow the incredible story of a single cell that just decides to go rogue. We'll track it from its first rebellious act all the way through its journey in the body. So let's dive in. You know, it's kind of wild when you think about it. Our bodies are these amazing communities of trillions of cells, all working together in harmony. In a healthy body, they all play by the rules. It's a simple principle, really. Live and let live. They grow when they should, they stop when they're told, and they respect each other's boundaries. It's like this perfectly organized, beautifully regulated society.
But what happens when that social contract gets shattered? What if one cell just stops cooperating and starts looking out only for number one? Well, that's exactly where our story really kicks off.
Okay, Section 1. A cell goes rogue. This is the origin story, where it all begins. So when all those normal checks and balances disappear, a cell can just start dividing like crazy, completely out of control. This creates something called a neoplasm, which is just a fancy term for an abnormal new growth of tissue. But you and I know it by a much more common name, a tumor.
Right, but here's a super important point. Not all tumors are actually cancer. The real difference comes down to benign versus malignant. Think of a benign tumor as, well, it's a problem, for sure, but it's a contained one. It grows, but it stays in its own neighborhood. A malignant tumor, though, that's the one that's invasive. It doesn't care about boundaries, and it has the potential to spread everywhere. And that ability to invade and spread, that's the classic hallmark of cancer.
And these malignant tumors get different names based on where they first started their rebellion. Carcinomas, which are actually the most common kind, pop up from the epithelial cells, the ones that line our organs and make up our skin. Then you have sarcomas, which start a little deeper in our connective tissues like bone, muscle, or even fat. All right, on to Section 2, the tumor takes hold. So now we've got this little ball of rogue cells. How in the world does it actually survive and get bigger?
Well, it's a two-phase process. At first, when the tumor is super tiny, it's pretty easy. It can just soak up all the nutrients it needs from the fluid around it, kind of like a sponge. But that simple life, yeah, it doesn't last for long.
And here's the tipping point, 1 millimeter. That's it. Once a tumor gets bigger than about 1 millimeter in diameter, we're talking the thickness of a credit card. That simple diffusion method just doesn't cut it anymore. The cells stuck in the middle would start to starve. So, to survive, the tumor does something, honestly, it's kind of brilliant and terrifying. It starts sending out these chemical signals that hijack the body's own systems, tricking it into growing brand new blood vessels just to feed the tumor. This whole process has a name, angiogenesis.
So now it's got its own private supply line of blood and nutrients. The tumor can grow fast, but its real danger isn't just about getting bigger. Oh no, it's the fact that it can travel. And that brings us to Section 3. Cancer on the move. This spreading process is called metastasis, and this is when things get really serious. It's when these malignant cells manage to break away from the original tumor and set up shop somewhere else in the body, creating new secondary tumors. This is the moment cancer goes from being a local issue to a full-blown systemic disease.
So, how do they get around? Well, these rogue cells have two main escape routes, two major highways. First, they can sneak into the lymphatic system. That's kind of like the body's drainage network, and they can get stuck in lymph nodes along the way. Or, route number 2, they can punch right through into blood vessels and use our bloodstream like an interstate, cruising to distant organs like the liver, the lungs, or even the brain.
Okay, so we've covered the how a tumor grows, how it spreads. But what about the why? Why does a perfectly normal cell decide to go rogue in the first place? Let's dig into that in Section 4, the usual suspects. Now here's something that's absolutely crucial to understand. Cancer is almost never a single event. It's not just one thing going wrong. The thinking is that it takes a whole series of hits, maybe 3 to 5 separate, random mutations, all happening in the exact same cell before it turns malignant. It's a multi-step process which, when you think about it, helps explain why the risk of cancer goes up so much as we get older. There's just more time for all those random errors to pile up.
And when we talk about chemical causes, it's often a 1-2 punch. First, you have what's called an initiator. This is the carcinogen that lands the first blow. It causes that first critical mutation in the DNA, the initial damage. But a lot of times that's not enough on its own. That's where the promoter comes in. A promoter doesn't actually cause mutations, but it comes along and tells that already damaged cell to start dividing and dividing and dividing. There's this classic experiment with mouse skin that shows this perfectly. If you just applied the initiator, the carcinogen, not much happened. If you just applied the promoter, again, not much. But if you applied the initiator first to cause the damage, and then followed up with the promoter, boom, a huge number of tumors. It proves that the order and the combination are everything.
And if you want a stark, real-world example of this exact thing, just look at this chart. It shows the risk of lung cancer. Compared to someone who doesn't smoke, a smoker's risk just skyrockets. And why? Because tobacco smoke is the perfect storm. It's a nasty cocktail packed with both initiators and promoters. That's what makes it so incredibly dangerous.
But it's not just about chemicals or random bad luck. There are other culprits out there. And that brings us to our final section, viral villains and a surprising link.
Believe it or not, certain viruses can cause cancer too. They're called oncogenic viruses. Now, the DNA viruses are pretty straightforward. They just shove their own DNA right into our cell's genome. But the RNA viruses, they're a bit trickier. They have an extra step they have to take. They have to figure out a way to turn their RNA into DNA first.
And that's where we meet a very special type of RNA virus called a retrovirus. It carries this secret weapon, an enzyme called reverse transcriptase. And what this enzyme does is let it perform that RNA to DNA conversion. It literally works backwards, hence the retro, from how biology is supposed to work. This little trick allows it to permanently write its genetic code right into ours.
So why is this working backwards mechanism so important to talk about? Because it turns out the human immunodeficiency virus, HIV, is also a retrovirus. Yep, the virus that causes AIDS uses the exact same sneaky reverse transcriptase trick to hijack our immune cells.
And that leaves us with this one final, really powerful thought. If both some cancer-causing viruses and HIV are such masters at hijacking our own cellular machinery for their own ends, what does that tell us? What does it teach us about the vulnerabilities that are just hidden deep within our own biology? It kind of reveals that the very same processes that give us life, the things that make us work, can also, when they're twisted and subverted, become the source of our most devastating diseases.